What are the upgrades and downgrades you need to know for fantasy football players ahead of your 2022 draft from the NFC? Time to break it down right here and right now as we go through all 16 teams on Locked On Fantasy Football.
Are Locked On Fantasy, your daily NFL fantasy podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Greetings, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Locked On Fantasy Football Podcast. As usual, I'm your host, Vinnie Iyer. When I'm not doing this, I'm writing about NFL and fantasy football for sportingnews.com. We've gotten you ready there for the season. We have our predictions, rankings, sleepers and bust picks that I have. The rookie rankings are consistently updated, draft strategy and tips for dominating your snake drafts. And we know this is the last weekend. We got a few more days, and then we go into Labor Day, and then it's almost kickoff of the 2022 NFL regular season with the Thursday night opener there with the Super Bowl champion Rams hosting the Bills. So exciting fantasy action immediately in that first game with two high-powered offenses. So we're looking forward to that. But before we do that, we got to continue with some more preseason prep for you. We've done all the analysis with the rankings and mock drafts here at Locked On Fantasy Football. Now we're going to continue looking at the latest stock watch here of players around the league. We did that with the AFC and looked at all their teams there on the previous show. So now we're going to focus on all the 16 NFC teams. We'll start with the Arizona Cardinals, get all the way through the Washington Commanders in our three segments on today's show. Thanks for making Locked On Fantasy Football your first listen today. We're free and available to you on all platforms. All right. Let's go ahead and start with the Cardinals and see what's going on with them. It's been pretty steady for Kyler Murray and James Conner. Not much has changed there. Kyler Murray in the middle of the QB1s. James Conner pretty locked into being a RB2. People see the touchdown regression, so that's been accounted for. But he's still going to get some good volume. Darrell Williams and Eno Benjamin behind him without Chase Edmonds. So about the same there. DeAndre Hopkins has been kind of being taken a shot at as a wide receiver 3, given he's going to miss the first 6 games with that suspension. And then really it's everyone else just picking parts of this team. And really the guys that are going less are Rondale Moore and AJ Green. Green has faded quite a bit here. Rondale Moore is still looking like a late round pick there for a lot of teams as a flyer here. Now, the one guy that is going a little bit higher is Zach Ertz. Just people realizing that there's not much else there in this passing game. Ertz has to be involved early. He's battling a little bit of injury. He's got some age issue as well, but there's not much else at tight end, and he did produce quite a bit with Kyler Murray when Hopkins was not available last year. So pretty much status quo for all the Cardinals here. Maybe a little bit bump up for Ertz, maybe a little bit of a bump for Connor as people look at his value, and it's pretty good there. He's right around Ezekiel Elliott and Leonard Fournette in the drafts here. I think there can be a case made that Connor should be in the top 12, but he's going in the right spot here, I think, anywhere from 12 to 16 at running back here, and that makes a lot of sense, even when you factor the touchdowns coming down to earth here in 2022. All right, let's go to the Atlanta Falcons. I'm not going to say that Kyle Pitts' stock has gone up all that much because it's pretty high now as a third-round pick, but there's been more banging the table for him where you don't want to maybe invest in Travis Kelce or Mark Andrews, but if you're going to go after a tight end a little bit early, Kyle Pitts is getting more attention to be that guy here. So, again, people don't want to invest in that high first-round pick, the end of the first round for Kelce. Now, Andrews, you're going to have to invest a pretty sizable second-round pick. So Kyle Pitts is becoming a little bit better value in relation to those guys, and that's where kind of he's rising, even though he's not going up the boards from being a third-round overall pick in fantasy. Now, Drake London, we've seen a little bit of him, but he's still a wide receiver 4 to me. The running backs are all over the board here. Cordell Patterson, people want to take their shots at, but he's been sliding down the boards. Tyler Algier, just not really moving up in relation to that. So it's just people are just trying to avoid the Falcons' passing game and running game as much as possible. And I think Pitts is where you look at being the value, but everything else here it's not really wanting you to drift to the Falcons here for fantasy football scoring in 2022. All right, let's go to the Carolina Panthers. Baker Mayfield has been a buried QB2. That's where he remains here in the transition from Cleveland to Carolina. Running back Christian McCaffrey, he can go as high as 2. Some leagues he's at 1. His ADP is shot up there because people are looking at his production when he's on the field, but we know he's a massive injury risk here. So I think he can go anywhere between 1 and 2 early in drafts to 9, 10 in the first round. I don't see him dropping out of the first round. The potential is too great there. There are some safer picks, however, Jonathan Taylor being one of them, the wide receivers, especially Justin Jefferson and Cooper Kupp. You look at also running back Najee Harris, having a little bit more appeal, Derrick Henry, and there's a good argument for Dalvin Cook as well over Christian McCaffrey. So his value is different depending on who you talk to. DJ Moore is pretty steady as a wide receiver too. Why he's like that, despite the volume and maybe some better quarterback play for Baker Mayfield, just not going to give you a lot in the touchdown department. There, Robbie Anderson and Terrace Marshall been off the radar, and especially now with Laviska Shenault Jr. joining the team in a trade from the Jaguars. So really, the only viable players on this team right now for fantasy, McCaffrey and Moore. McCaffrey, I prefer to take him as a lower end RB1 and Moore as an upside wide receiver 2. All right, let's go to the Chicago Bears. Justin Fields, he's been polarizing as well in reality and fantasy. I think he's an upside QB2 for sure. He's got more of that, I think, because of his running ability than either Tua Tagovailoa or Trevor Lawrence. You can also throw Mac Jones in that mix. So when you look at that, Justin Fields rising a little bit there, and a good compliment there to a starter that you might be shaky about, such as a Derek Carr, or you're thinking that might have a bit of regression, Aaron Rodgers, but you want an upside guy behind it. You can definitely look at Justin Fields. And running back David Montgomery has been sliding a bit. He's in that tier that we kind of want to avoid with Cam Akers and Antonio Gibson. So not interested in him. Khalil Herbert slowed down a little bit as Montgomery's got the key reps here, but I still like Khalil Herbert. If anything happens to Montgomery, you'd think Herbert will have a big role. So he's going in the hundreds, so pretty good value later in drafts there in relation to Montgomery. Then you look at Cole Kmet holding steady as one of the bottom 3 tight end ones. I think you can take him as high as a tight end 9, but definitely not falling out of the top 12 at that position, with questions about Pat Freiermuth and Mike Gesicki and Hunter Henry and some guys right behind him. When you look at wide receiver Darnell Mooney, he's bumped up a little bit. Still, I think he's being underdrafted as a wide receiver 3. He is the clear number 1 target there as a wide receiver 2, that he can bring that return here for Chicago. So that's how it's going. Really, it's the big 3 that I'm interested in Chicago for the sleeper value. That's Fields, Mooney, and Kmet that can well outproduce their ADP and ranking, where David Montgomery, I think you can continue to fade here because it's going to happen at some point. Khalil Herbert just has more juice than Montgomery. All right, the final team we'll tackle in this segment to open the show is the Dallas Cowboys. And yeah, there's some downgrades going on. Dak Prescott has to be bumped down a little bit into maybe 9-10 range among the QB1s. You lose Tyron Smith. The numbers haven't been always good for Dak Prescott without Tyron Smith. But on top of that, Michael Gallup's not quite ready. Jalen Tolbert is in a key role, but he's a rookie. You got CeeDee Lamb and Dalton Schultz, but not much else there that you can look at. So Dak, you just have to be buyer beware on him, especially when he's not doing the same type of running and scoring on the ground like he used to. So Ezekiel Elliott is also holding steady right there in the James Conner range as a mid RB2. So nothing has changed there. The touchdown and usage in the red zone keep him up there. That gives him a pretty nice floor here. Tony Pollard has some upside, but he's more of a flex play to me there still because of the presence of Elliott, and Elliott getting a lot of the touches in the red zone there. And CeeDee Lamb, last but not least, you look at him, he's going in the top 7-8 wide receiver. It's really determining, do you take Mike Evans, Tyreek Hill, Deebo Samuel ahead of what you have Lamb going for? No, I think Lamb is right there behind the big 5, so to speak, when you have the trio at the top in the first tier, Justin Jefferson, Cooper Kupp, and Jamar Chase. Then you get to Stephon Diggs and Devontae Adams. I think there's a case to be made that CeeDee Lamb, eating up the targets with not much else there, should go right behind those guys in fantasy. And it belongs in a tier separate there with Diggs and Adams as wide receiver 6 on the board. All right, there you have it. There's a look at 5 teams in the stock watch for all their offensive skill players for fantasy football drafts here in 2022 as we close closer to the start of the 2022 NFL regular season. We're only 1 week away. We'll get into the other 11 teams in our last 2 segments. It's almost started of the NFL season, we said. I love this time of year, as you do too. If you're into sports betting or fantasy, you need a competitive edge to win. That's why I highly recommend the Elias Game Plan app. It's the ultimate sports betting and fantasy companion for the NFL, NBA, and MLB. Elias Game Plan is the only sports app from the most trusted name in sports stats, Elias Sports Bureau, the official statisticians of U.S. pro sports leagues, including the NFL. Their app lets you access team and player stats, head-to-head team comparisons, Elias insights from the Elias Sports Bureau's research team. This app is really your one-stop source for player news and league-validated player stats and team records, expert game analysis for betting, building your fantasy team, and impressing your friends. Perfect for the postseason and preseason. You get player previews to help you draft a winning fantasy team and team previews so you know what to expect as the regular season kicks off. And with new features such as player injury analysis available all the time, you can take your game to the next level. Really, Elias is the company that defined sports stats, and they're here to help you now cash in. NFL season is right around the corner, so don't wait. Download the Elias Game Plan app today. And right now, I have a special offer. When you subscribe, you get a 14-day free trial of a monthly subscription plan, but only if you use the promo code LOCKEDONNFL. Use the promo code LOCKEDONNFL. Find Elias Game Plan Sports Betting in the App Store or Play Store today, and use the promo code LOCKEDONNFL to get that free 14-day trial of a monthly subscription. All right, we'll continue the show here looking at our news and notes, upgrades, downgrades, updates you need to know for NFC offensive skill players. We took care of 5 teams in our first segment. We'll open the next one with the Detroit Lions here. So Lions, Amon-Ra St. Brown has bumped up a little bit into wide receiver 2 status. Clearly the number 1 target there. Jameson Williams needs some time. DJ Chark getting accustomed to Jared Goff. So St. Brown might be the slot guy, but he's the key target here. So may not be too much of a drop-off from last year's finish as a rookie. TJ Hawkinson holding steady in that middle tier of tight ends behind George Kittle and Darren Waller with Dallas Goedert and Dalton Schultz. I still would take Schultz and Goddard ahead of him, but Hawkinson right there in that middle for a starting lineup spot ahead of Pat Freiermuth and Cole Kmet. You look at that spot, good for him. And running back DeAndre Swift right there in the bottom of the RB1. So really it's a debate between him, Aaron Jones, Nick Chubb. Pretty close there with DeAndre Swift. In half and full point PPR leagues, I lean more Swift because of his primary receiving role, kind of the Austin Eckler of the Lions here. So that's where he stands right now. Not as much has changed with him. St. Brown up, Hawkinson steady. Jared Goff just being flying under the radar here. He's not really going up or down. He's kind of been buried in the QB2s all the time, even in the QB3s. But I think, again, he's being undervalued. He's one of my favorite deep sleepers this year, given the weapons that they have now in Detroit. All right, let's go from the Lions to another NFC North team, the Packers. So Packers, Al Lazard, I don't think his stock really went down. It's just that there was hype over Christian Watson when they took a second-round pick on him. And then Romeo Doubs took the rookie hype over there in the offseason. So we've all been all about Watson and Dobbs, but Lazard is the old hat here. And we're not talking old, the way that Randall Cobb is. And Sammy Watkins is new to the team. So Al Lazard, the established chemistry with Aaron Rodgers, and with Rodgers' comments, not trusting all his receivers, he's going to go with the guy that he believes in the most. So Al Lazard, kind of right there, wide receiver 3 with wide receiver 2 upside for sure. And he's going more as a wide receiver 2 in many leagues here. And really, everyone's on Romeo Doubs late, but I think he's more of a deep play threat, stretch the field. He's a bit inconsistent. So Watson versus Doubs will be an interesting thing to watch here. Who emerges there to help Al Lazard most? Robert Tonyan, kind of an afterthought as a tight end 2 until he gets healthy. Here, Aaron Jones, I like him a little bit more. I think there's an argument to be made that he's a solid RB1. Some are taking him as an RB2 right there with the Nick Chubb range. Part of it is we're looking with Chubb and Jones about having another back that can steal some touches there, where Swift is perceived as kind of being feature guy, even though Jamal Williams is there. So that's what you're looking at. But I think Aaron Jones, A.J. Dillon, both should be going up here. Rodgers did show a lot of praise on them and leaning on the running game, and they're both very good pass catchers. And this, again, we talked about a little bit that Jones and Dillon could very much end up like the combination of New Orleans in 2017, a rookie Alvin Kamara and Mark Ingram. And that's what we look at with the Packers at the other positions. But with Aaron Rodgers, look, you can take him anywhere from 9 to 12. There's a lot of QB1 value here that would produce top 12 seasons in previous years. There's not much separating there. I do prefer getting a platoon with Rodgers. I do love the Aaron Rodgers, Matthew Stafford combination. You get a lot of good matchups there if you're going to do that. So that's another strategy you can employ, a high-end streaming situation if you wait for quarterback and go there. So wait it out for Rodgers as much as you can, but I would still go for upside guys such as Trey Lance ahead of Rodgers as well as Jalen Hurts because the running cheat code there. And both those teams are going to open up the passing game and have running quarterbacks there. So that's why Rodgers is so-called downgraded because we didn't have a Trey Lance in play last year. To keep that in mind, Hurts now makes a few more people believe there and just squeezing it out. I mean, there's just so many guys in this range here that you have to look at. Russell Wilson, Dak Prescott, Wilson coming back for a bounce back here. So it's not anything against Aaron Rodgers. It just shows you the depth at QB1 here in that typical production for 2022. Let's go to Stafford's team from Rodgers' team here, the Rams. Stafford, I think, holding steady there in that 9, 10, 11, 12 range as QB1. I don't think he's going to duplicate the touchdown level from last year, but that's why I think it's good to hedge your bets a little bit with a Rodgers-Stafford combination here in a lot of leagues. Let's go to running back Cam Akers and Darrell Henderson, pretty much downgraded. People don't want to invest in these injured backs here, and really, I don't know how it's going to play out. You have Kyron Williams and Jake Funk also on the roster. So, again, it's hard because Akers, Henderson, they could toggle between these guys. They don't have the fallback plan of Sony Michel this time. Maybe they'll look at him, but Michel released and getting looks there from the other Los Angeles team after he was left by the Dolphins. So, interesting. I just don't know if I can trust the Rams. Backfield, Cooper Kupp. His stock is pretty much solidified as the number 2 wide receiver in all formats behind Justin Jefferson. You look at Allen Robinson, he's been a solid wide receiver too. He's bumping up a little bit into the top 20 easily here with his touchdown potential in this offense, and Van Jefferson having a little bit of a knee issue. Tyler Higbee is a bit of a sleeper tight end. He's going well in the tight end twos, but I think I would consider taking him over the likes of Mike Gesicki and Albert O and Noah Fant, and some of these guys are going ahead of Tyler Higbee. I would much prefer Higbee there. And again, Stafford finds it all together. So we're curbing our enthusiasm about all the Rams a little bit. Kupp is the highest still on the board here and deserving of a top 6 overall pick and the second wide receiver on the board. The first wide receiver on the board belongs to the Vikings. That's where Justin Jefferson's stock remains here. Dalvin Cook, there's an argument he can be the number 2 running back behind Jonathan Taylor. I love this Kevin O'Connell offensive promise here. Jefferson's going to eat up targets. Cook is going to eat up touches here. They're going to use Cook in different ways, open up the running and the passing games here. So that should help Jefferson and Cook quite a bit. So they're elite options for your team. Adam Thielen, maybe not getting enough love as a wide receiver 3, but he can survive there with touchdowns. They're still looking for answers. They traded for Jalen Reagor of the Eagles. So they don't know who's going to be that consistent number 3. KJ Osborne, Jalen Naylor early in camp do some things, but a lot of opening there, and they're not sure how much Irv Smith can play and be effective. So some question marks there for sure. That's all bumped up Adam Thielen into pretty solid wide receiver 3 status at this point. With Kirk Cousins, he's right there behind Rodgers and Stafford in that tier with Derek Carr there before you get into those question marks between Fields and Tyvola and Lawrence and trying to figure it out at that tier. So that's where Kirk Cousins is about QB 13 or 14. Again, that shows the depth of this. So a lot of Jefferson, a lot of Cook, a lot of Thielen in drafts for the most part. Kirk Cousins, however, can be a nice starter, especially if you can stack him season long with Jefferson on your team. Last team we'll look at here in this segment from the NFC, New Orleans Saints. Alvin Kamara having a little bit of a downgrade. He's on the borderline RB1, RB2 with now DeAndre Swift and Aaron Jones and Nick Chubb maybe have a little bit more appeal. Kamara dwindled a little bit last year. Some wear took effect. This team going toward downfield passing game a little bit more. The Sean Payton effect and Drew Brees effect is not there. So losing Drew Brees and then Payton back-to-back years could kind of Kamara's work. That said, I still think because of the volume ahead of Mark Ingram, who's a lot older than that 17 run with Kamara, plus Tony Jones Jr., I think you're looking at a lot of Kamara. So the volume, the pass catching really helps him. So half point in PPR, I do love Kamara still but you have to downgrade him a little bit in standard because he's not a big touchdown guy except for one season. And I think that fade could continue here a little bit here for Kamara, but still, to me, a back end RB1. Now, Mark Ingram and Tony Jones, I say one of them is a handcuff. I would go with Jones. He's got the fresher legs here, but it still could be an ambiguous situation with the Ingram Jones committee there should something happen to Kamara. At wide receiver, Chris Olave keeps bumping up a little bit. I'm not interested as much in Michael Thomas anymore. The hamstring has popped up. Jarvis Landry also has been beat up, and he's a little bit older. So not feeling it with either of those two guys as much. I want the upside of Chris Olave more later as a wide receiver 5 than wanting to invest in either of those two receivers. You can't look at anything at tight end here. And Jameis Winston, he's an okay player as a backup QB2, but doesn't have a lot of upside. He's a guy that if you can find the right matchup for your QB1 that you're starting on a regular basis, that's who you draft. So I see him in the teens, as low as the 20s. That's fine for Jameis Winston in his ranking here as the clear leader of the Saints passing game in 2022. All right, we will get into our final 6 NFC teams and their latest news, notes, updates, upgrades, downgrades there from the Giants to the Commanders. So bookends from the NFC East. Before we do that, I have an important announcement from the NHTSA. Are you one of those people who thinks it's okay to drive stoned? What's the worst that can happen? You end up driving below the speed limit? It's no big deal, right? Wrong. The truth is reaction times slow way down when you're high. You not only put yourself in danger, but everyone around you. Talk about a buzzkill. Stop kidding yourself. It's not easy or okay to drive high. If you've been using marijuana in any form, do not get behind the wheel. If you feel different, you drive different. Drive high, get a DUI. All right, it is time to continue the show here and to close it here on Locked On Fantasy Football. And we will start looking at the Giants and what we need to know on their depth chart, what we're seeing at wide receiver first. Kadarius Toney, I want to like him a little bit more, but you have Wan'Dale Robinson, that versatile role. Kenny Galladay's there. You look at Sterling Shepard still around. I'd say the upside belongs to Wan'Dale Robinson. I'll just go with that, where Kadarius Toney might have the floor that you're looking at, but I would also not be surprised if Galladay is the man here. So really a lot depends on Daniel Jones. Galladay's had a few struggles here, but the one thing they've indicated for sure, they want to use Toney and Robinson as much as possible. I think it's hard to know until we see Brian Dable and Mike Kafka actually deploy these guys and see what happens with the way that Jones plays in this offense. So really, I want to avoid the Giants' passing game in general as much as possible. There, Daniel Jones, again, he can give you some value in the right matchups as a QB2, but I really don't want to be attached to that part of the Giants. And look at Saquon Barkley. I mean, he's still going as a QB1 borderline there. Again, that Fournette, Elliott, Connor range, but I just want to avoid him so much. I mean, Elliott is pretty durable. Keep that in mind. Fournette can wear down, but he's the man right now until Rachaad White is a bigger factor. He's a plus handcuff here, where Saquon Barkley doesn't have that handcuff, and James Conner in a really good situation in Arizona. So it's a high injury risk to take on Saquon Barkley. So there's some varying opinions on him. There's some that are really high on him and have that Christian McCaffrey-like optimism that he's going to stay on the field and live up to the promise. To me, he's even less appealing than McCaffrey because he's only shown it in brief stretches and mainly in his rookie season here. So the wear and tear catching up to Barkley from Penn State and early in his career with the Giants. So I'm going to avoid that pick as much as possible, but I can see him going because of the volume that he's going to get and some of the promise in this offense as a backdoor QB1 that you feel comfortable with in fantasy this season. Well, let's go to the Eagles. A lot of things in flux there. Jalen Hurts, the stock has gone up. He's had a very good preseason here. A.J. Brown leveled off as a wide receiver 2, but with some wide receiver 1 upside beyond a lot of the names that I mentioned. He's just going to be in a more wide open passing game. That also makes DeVonta Smith an appealing wide receiver 3 sleeper a little later. Dallas Goedert remains a solid middle tier tight end 1. Hurts getting bumped up again. I think he can go in the top 6 or 7. Would not surprise me. At quarterback, he can bring that return if he's running enough. Maybe the touchdowns go down there, but they go up with the passing and the yardage as well as they open things up with A.J. Brown and Smith and Goddard in the mix here for the Eagles. Now, the running game, a little bit of different story here. Miles Sanders definitely continues to be downgraded. Boston Scott rising a little bit with Sanders' kind of injury issues that have popped up, as well as the no touchdowns from last year. Kenneth Gainwell has been shooting up as well into a running back 3-4 borderline there, but don't forget about Scott. Maybe it's an RB5 or RB6 that you can look at. But Right now, Miles Sanders, way too rich to take him as an RB2, and his stock continues to drop here. And he's another guy I want to avoid in drafts as well in 2022. All right, let's go from the NFC East all the way out to the NFC West for a double shot of teams. We'll go to the San Francisco 49ers. So we talked about Trey Sermon as a deep sleeper. We've also talked about Tyrion Davis-Price. Well, Sermon got waived. Davis-Price is hanging on there. You still have Jeff Wilson. JaMychal Hasty was cut. You now have the rookie Jordan Mason in the mix behind Elijah Mitchell. So Elijah Mitchell's stock is pretty solidified now as an RB2 there in this backfield. And handcuff, good luck with that. I think it's going to be a committee approach to replace him, and it's hard to know. We thought that Sermon was going to be the guy last year when Raheem Mostert went down, but nope, they immediately went to Mitchell. So very unpredictable backfield continues, especially after Sermon. All reports were that he had a strong camp here to rebound, get out of the doghouse, but all of a sudden he's cut. So we don't know what we're going to get from the 49ers backfield. Very frustrating. If you have to go to someone and you need an RB2, you have to go with Elijah Mitchell early in the season. Now, Deebo Samuel, I mentioned, still in the wide receiver 1 range there, but maybe in the back end behind all those guys. The 5 that I talked about, Jefferson, Kupp, Chase, Diggs, and Adams. And you have the Evans, Hill, Lamb tier. So I think right there with A.J. Brown is where you're going to find Deebo Samuel. Brandon Aiyuk getting a lot of buzz. I'm just worried about the ball not being diversified as much here. I do think it cuts into George Kittle's work a little bit. Deebo will also see decrease if Aiyuk is a bigger factor here, but I think what you're going to see is more throws to the wide receiver. The reports are that chemistry is not as good, Trey Lance and George Kittle, the way it was with Jimmy Garoppolo and George Kittle, that the receivers are getting a little bit more buzz because the arm strength and ability to push the ball downfield a little bit better with Lance and the Garoppolo. So that's what gives Aiyuk a little bit, again, buzz as a wide receiver 3. I'm just going to be a little bit cautious in general because it's a run-first team, and you still have Samuel and Kittle. You also have Danny Gray, Juwan Jennings. So this could be a diversified passing game. Don't forget about Kyle Juszczyk. They have a bunch of guys that they can put the ball in the hands of here with the 49ers. So it's a tough team to read. It's a very good reality offense because they're loaded with Samuel, Aiyuk, and Kittle and Mitchell. But again, Kyle Shanahan very fickle with the way they use players here in different ways. But I do see the Aiyuk upgrade there into potential wide receiver 2, but I would draft him as a wide receiver 3. Same thing with Deebo. It could be the wide receiver top 5 again, but I'd be more comfortable drafting him as a high-end wide receiver 2 here. 22, George Kittle holding steady there. I think he's still the number 4 tight end on the board there behind Kelsey, Andrews, and Pitts. And he's kind of the Christian McCaffrey tight ends. If he's on the field and healthy, he's going to produce big time. That's what we need, but I'm willing to take a little bit of risk on George Kittle because there's some tight end depth that you go ahead and you don't have to invest as highly on him as you do on McCaffrey at running back 1. All right, let's go from San Francisco to Seattle. Really, what the Geno Smith decision there to start a quarterback really hurts DK Metcalf. Keep dropping him down as a wide receiver 3. I think it also hurts Tyler Lockett because I know Geno Smith and Lockett have a connection, but Lockett is not going to have that downfield element. Drew Lock does have a bigger arm than Geno Smith. So Lockett a little bit bump up as a wide receiver 4 to 3. I think DK Metcalf gets buried with the wide receiver 3s. Unfortunately, the quarterback situation is too bad. Rashad Benny bumps back up to a RB2, RB3 borderline. Ken Walker hasn't practiced. He'll get back to health at some point, but Penny has to be there right now. The backups would be Travis Homer in passing situations, and DJ Dallas kind of as a swing guy that you can use in early downs as well. But watch out for Ken Walker. His stock has definitely gone down as Penny's has gone up a little bit here. 22 and 2. Noah Fant, I just don't see anyone really banging the table. He's just kind of there in the rankings. There with this situation, maybe the Geno Smith change short to intermediate passer helps a little bit there, so something to look at. But still, no Fant. You just can't be fully comfortable with him as your tight end 1. I think you have to look at David Njoku, some other guys that are being undervalued in position, Brevin Jordan, someone like that. So you have your options here if you don't go for a top tight end early. All right, 2 more teams to talk about. One is the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So let's look at them. Mike Evans' stock is pretty much held here, right, with the Tyreek Hill there in the wide receiver 8 to 10 range. That's about right, given his consistency with touchdowns and 1,000-yard seasons. So that's fine with him. Chris Godwin going to right spot there as a wide receiver 3 with some upside when he returns. Russell Gage has been going down a little bit, partly because Julio Jones is going up. Right now, you look at both those guys as wide receiver 5s because of the presence of the other. Gage, I think, will have the bigger role early should Godwin have to miss time there. But they did cut Tyler Johnson, trying to kind of streamline the passing game a little bit. Cameron Brate still going way down there as a tight end 2. I think he can have a bit of higher value. Fournette pretty solid RB2, but make sure you get Rachaad White. His value has gone up behind him. He's the preferred guy I want to look at behind Fournette in this backfield. And last but not least, for sure, is Tom Brady, the GOAT. He's been going up in a lot of drafts I've seen of late. He was locked in as the quarterback 8, but now I see him going as quarterback 5, 6. Even in one league, went ahead of Lamar Jackson, right behind Josh Allen, Justin Herbert, and Patrick Mahomes in some order. But Tom Brady did finish as QB4. The offensive line questions are a little concerning, but he still has his tackles there, and Donovan Smith and Tristan Wirfs. So he's well protected on the edges here. The weapons are going to get better when Godwin returns. Julio Jones gets worked in the mix a little bit. You have Braid, you have Kyle Rudolph. You should see a little bit more Rachaad White out of the backfield catching passes. We know Fournette's a pretty good pass catcher. So not a lot of change except for losing Rob Gronkowski and Antonio Brown. But they replaced that and replenished that, adding a little bit of Rudolph and the rookie Cade Otton at tight end. They added Gage and Jones at wide receiver there to give them a little bit more experience. So Tom Brady, there's a good argument he stays status quo, but I still think I would take Lamar Jackson and Tom Brady. There's a strong argument that Brady should be the QB5 off the board. However, even ahead of Kyler Murray and Jalen Hurts, just because of what he can do in this offense. It's also the last season. He's going to go out there and try to play at a high level to close out his career. We assume this is it for Brady, but this window is also closing for the Buccaneers. So I expect one more big year out of Tom Brady, starting with the game against the Cowboys in Week 1. All right, finally, we'll get to the Washington Commanders and their stock watch here. Carson Wentz has gone up and down, up and down. I think that makes him a deep sleeper because, again, someone's throwing the ball in Washington. He has some volume here. Streaming option for sure. That's all you're going to look at. But I think he's higher in the QB2s than people would like to admit at this stage just because, again, he improvs and does weird things and he frustrates people from a reality perspective. But the bottom line is he can put up some fantasy points there with his arm and legs. All right, Commanders, where else we're going? Terry McLaurin pretty much holding steady as a wide receiver 2. The touchdowns and the quarterback situation give you pause. Jahan Dotson has slipped a little bit as a wide receiver 4, the rookie. There, Logan Thomas has just been an afterthought in a lot of drafts there, so you can get him pretty cheap as a tight end too, coming off his major injury. And again, not another bad lottery ticket if you're going to play the streaming game there at tight end. At running back, interesting developments there for sure because you got the Brian Robinson Jr. incident where he was shot, but he returned to practice all of a sudden. He's not going to maybe play for a while. We know that. So does that really boost up Antonio Gibson, or are they going to work in different guys now? They did release Jarrett Patterson, so we'll see if they do any replacing there. And we'll know that Robinson's probably out for long term, at least for the season, if they make some moves there for one of the veterans that is cut here. But Antonio Gibson does help his value a little bit. Unfortunately for Robinson, I mean, he was headed for a nice power role here, the rookie from Alabama, but that just puts his career off to a really bad start here, unfortunately. I really wanted to see more of him, but again, Antonio Gibson might have to be the early down guy here with J.D. McKissick picking up the receiving touches, and I'll have to wait on the returns for Robinson here in Washington. All right, so there you have it. There's the upgrades, downgrades, updates you need to know from all the NFC teams for all the offensive skill players that you'd be thinking about in your fantasy football drafts in 2022. So good catch-up show here. If you missed our AFC look at all this, it was yesterday's. Check it out in the archives. Thanks for making Locked On Fantasy Football your first listen every day. Now for your second listen, go check out the Ultimate Pro Football Preview 2022, an 8-episode extravaganza to get ready for the NFL season. Local team experts of the Locked On Podcast Network, plus a betting angle from Lee Sterling of Locked On Bets, all combining into one ultimate NFL preview. Search for Ultimate Pro Football Preview 2022 on your Odyssey app, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcast. That's also where you'll find Locked On Fantasy Football or Locked On Fantasy Football with our look at the NFC risers and fallers. This has been Vinnie Iyer. See you tomorrow as we close the week with our final draft prep for you in 2022.